1874.
Preview show.
Hello, welcome to 1874. It's time for a preview show as the lunchtime game at Villa Park is Aston Villa against Brighton. It's a 12:30 kickoff. For those not going, it's on TNT at lunchtime. I've used the term lunchtime about 3 times there for completely unnecessary. I'm Dan Bardell, joined by my good friend David Reed to preview said game. David, how are you?
I'm all right, mate. Thank you. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, good. Tired, as we've discussed before we've come on. I'm so tired and I've had such a busy time of it in the last 48 hours. I haven't even had a chance to look back at Villa's Carabo Cup exit on Wednesday night. I have seen the 3-minute highlights, but I can't really decipher much from that other than there were 2 terrible goals that Villa gave away. You watched the game. We'll just talk about it before we get into the preview. How disappointed are you?
Extremely. I think I tweeted before the game yesterday because there was a bit of to and fro online between supporters saying, how strong do you go? Do you rest players? There's European games. There's a lot of games coming up. Do you make changes? Do you play a strong team? And I tweeted saying, look, minimal changes. There is a cup there to be won. There's only a few games that you've got to play, and then you're potentially at Wembley to win a cup. And as it's transpired, a lot of big teams are actually out of the competition. And unfortunately, we've gone out as well. It was shocking. It was shocking. The whole game was poor. It was bad. It was bad. There were a lot of things. There were a lot of things wrong yesterday. The goals, obviously, individual errors. We've seen them before, and they've happened again. I'm reluctant to go too hard and too kind of critical on the players because they've achieved so much. They're capable of so much. And they've showed that already this season. For me, this was a collective failure that Villa didn't progress in the Cup. And I don't mean just the manager. I don't mean just the players. I mean the commercial department, probably the communications department as well. Because the whole narrative around this game, from my point of view, was wrong from the start. The fact that, there's obviously been a lot of chat around the ticket prices, and that was obviously correct because the stadium wasn't full. Now, I wasn't overly keen on the boos at half-time. I thought that was a little bit unfair given what the team was given in recent weeks and months. But I did understand it because the first half was so poor. But certainly the ticket prices were wrong. I also think that not doing a pre-match press conference was wrong as well. Now, I know that Villa aren't obligated to do one, but there was no pre-match content in terms of video, from what I could tell, from manager or player. And I think the whole communication around the game was wrong. Now, Unai Emery talks a lot about Villa being a family. It felt like there wasn't the connection there yesterday and in the build-up to the game. If Unai Emery had have spoken to the media, and I know he's done it a lot, and I know he had to hold a news conference on Friday, less than 24 hours after Europe, but I think if he'd have spoken to the media, he would have been able to communicate the message of, look, come to the game. I'm going to put out a strong team. We will have the right attitude. We want to go and win this cup. And that message didn't really come out ahead of the game. And I think almost the apathy built, and it spilled over into the game. And that was just a build-up. And then you consider the setup of the side, which I think was probably, it's easy in hindsight, isn't it? But it was wrong.
Everton went quite strong, didn't they? Do you think Villa maybe thought Everton would go a bit weaker than they did as well? Because they stereotypically, I think Premier League teams do make a host of changes, whereas Everton went quite strong off the back of their win at Brentford at the weekend. And then we obviously made our changes, committed to that.
Yeah, they did go strong, but then if I'm Sean Dyche and my team's got pumped a month ago, 4-0 at Villa Park, I'm not going there with a second string and risking a potential thrashing again. I'm going to go with a strong team. They changed things a little bit. There was a game plan. It was kind of 5-4-1. I even saw Pickford kind of joining their build-up in a back four, and Patterson was pushing on. There was a clear plan for them. And Onana, I'm impressed with him every time I see him. He is top class. He really is in the centre of that midfield. And if there's a player who is of a higher quality than perhaps Everton's position in the Premier League, he's the one that is showing it. So I expected Everton to go strong and be kind of well in this game and want to win this game, and that's how it transpired. Really, there was Unai talked after the game around the agreement or the plan was to play John McGinn 45 minutes, Luca Dean 45 minutes, and obviously McGinn started at left back, and it didn't quite work. Well, it didn't work at all. And just collectively, the players were miles off it. You can blame attitude, you can blame setup, but when it's not just two or three players that aren't playing well. It's a collective kind of 10, 11 players that aren't playing particularly well. I think you can't just blame individual players for that. I think it's mostly to do with the setup, mostly to do with tactical things and the build up to the game. That's how I see it anyway. But you would like to think that the players coming into that side would have showed more for that game. So as you can tell, I'm quite disappointed that we've got.
I absolutely had no idea that you were going to come on and say all that, and I think you've raised an awful lot of valid points there. I wasn't expecting that from you, but I always think it's difficult for the players. I always think it's tough when you make changes because there's no rhythm, there's no fluidity because you haven't been playing together each week. It's not an excuse, but I do always think that makes it tougher. I thought the same the other week in the European game that we lost, albeit it was a slightly better performance by the sounds of it in that game. So a lot of what you've said, I do agree with. I think Emery talks about the connection, and I'm sure he's spoken about wanting to go strong and wanting to win all the cups. But you're right, the message last night wasn't really there. The ticketing strategy, everyone's been over it on social media. I think, if you are charging those ticket prices that they've charged, you're expecting to see a full tilt side. In my opinion, previous years, I will say, up until recently, I do think Villa's pricing has been reasonable. I don't think they've got a lot wrong in terms of pricing until the last few years when they've started to raise everything, and even some of that I don't completely disagree with. I understand it. But I do think I looked at that side last night. Obviously, I was out last night. I couldn't work out what the formation was going to be. I didn't expect to be seeing John McGinn playing at left back or hearing that. It's a surprise to hear that. I guess it's where we're at with Moreno being injured at the moment and him not really wanting to overwork Luca Dean because he is having to play every single week at the moment. I think maybe if the game had been a week ago and you take on Everton, you probably beat them. I think they've probably got the tails up a little bit after having won at Brentford. It's given them a little bit of confidence. But from just seeing the goals back, the 2 goals that Villa conceded, they're schoolboy level goals. You can't be conceding goals like that. They're not good. Neither of those goals can be dressed up. I've no idea what the overall point is that I'm trying to make. I don't think I'm even trying to make one. But did just think under Emery that we'd go for the cups. The fans. I don't know whether the club. I think they probably do, but the fans are desperate for a trophy. I genuinely think fans would take 11th, 12th finish and winning a trophy. Really want to see this team win something. It's been so long since the club's won a trophy, and I was probably more annoyed with getting knocked out against Stevenage. Last year. I thought that one really hurt me. Maybe it's because I didn't watch last night. Probably the first time I haven't watched a Villa game in God knows how long. But maybe that shows my apathy towards it as well. And because I was just like, I've already committed to going to a gig. I've bought these tickets probably 8-9 months ago, not realising there's going to be a Carabo Cup game on. But I didn't even consider going to the Villa game because of the things that you've spoke about, just knowing that it probably would be 2. I thought it would be 2 second strings. Like I just thought it wouldn't be an enjoyable evening, and it turns out it just wasn't an enjoyable evening at all.
Yeah, but I guess it shows how far Villa have come, because if we play this game a year ago, it's a toss-up if we beat Everton in a cup game. But given the progress that's been made, you're going into this game almost expecting Villa to go out there and turn over Everton, given as well what's happened a month ago. So it kind of shows how far we've come, that the expectation level is there for us to go out and beat Everton. But, we've said all this, but the team that played last night, in my opinion, was good enough to beat Everton.
Yeah, I would have said that as well, the 11 individuals, yeah.
It was just obviously things weren't going right for them.
I think in a way Emery's the victim of his own success as well, because every time there's a little setback, it does feel like the end of the world. Not that I'm not saying last night was a little setback, but every time we lose, for example, because we've won so many games and he's been so good and turned the club around in such a short space of time, I think there's an expectation level there now that we'll win these games, and you can't just turn up and win. We saw that last week in Europe when we made changes. Maybe people would look at maybe lessons weren't learned from Europe, where we made a host of changes and we've come a cropper, because the same things happened again. And I think at the start of the season, it felt like there was a squad depth there, and then there's a couple of injuries, and we're still carrying. We've got the 2 long-term ones, but there is a few other injuries, players missing last night as well. Once you've got around 3 or 4 players missing, and we make changes, we're not maybe as strong as we thought we were. Do you think that there's a case for that?
Look, I think, excuse me, I think there is a question mark around consistency in performance. So last season, from my point of view, Emery kind of played a fairly consistent first 11 or first 13 players that he relied on in terms of personnel. Now, this season, obviously, he's had to strengthen. We've had to strengthen because of European football. He has changed and altered personnel. But this isn't just this season going to be a physical test for the players. This is a huge mental test. I'm not just talking about, blimey, I'm in Bosnia on Thursday and I've got to come back and play a Premier League game 3 days later. I'm talking about the kind of mental test that it's going to be playing different roles within Unai Emery's system. He is so detailed about what he wants players to do. And even in this season, he has tasked the players with doing different jobs in different games and has almost changed things a little bit or altered or tweaked things slightly every week. You think about Cash starting the season low in build-up and being a part of a back three, then he switches and plays high the next week, and Villa play Konza as a kind of alternative right back, and Carlos comes in. He ends up getting injured. Kamara in the last couple of weeks has been playing as the third centre back in build-up and pulling deeper into the right-hand side, and Cash has gone higher. And it's all about those different switches of positions. McGinn has played left side, he's played right side, now he's played left back. The only kind of consistency that Villa have had in terms of jobs to do and personnel has been Kamara and Luiz, really. Even kind of Diaby and Zaniola have ended up playing different sides or slightly different positions. And, you know, this is not just going to be a physical test for these players, it's a mental test. Can they take on instruction at a day's notice? Can they get the stuff from the analysts 24 hours before the game and say, this is your job this week, you have to carry this out to the letter, this is what you need to do? Can they carry those instructions into a match day? It's not easy for them, I do get that. And coupled with all the physical stuff, coupled with all the travelling, coupled with, you know, less time seeing your family, it's not easy. But this is, if Villa and this group of players want to get to the top and the top level and you're competing for Champions League football, this is the kind of test that Villa are going to have to face and get on with.
Players may be getting used to being in and out as well, and sitting games out. Like you're saying, we had that consistency of selection between probably 12 and 13 players. Last season, there was very few changes. Now, even the players that, you know, might play 2 games in a row, that the players, for example, that would have played at Chelsea on Sunday and then played last night, you got 3 or 4 people who you didn't play with for the last few games before. So even for the players that are playing consistently, it becomes more tough. I do think there's something valid in that. Our season has looked quite inconsistent so far, because generally it has been win one, lose one. But I'm talking about all across all competitions here when we've had games in a row. If you take the Premier League in isolation, and we'll look ahead to the Brighton game now, 4 wins from 6 is a really, really strong start from the club, and we're going really well in the league. And if you look at the pattern so far of our results, actually the fact that we've lost in the cup on Wednesday, probably a good thing. It means we might beat Brighton on Saturday, because that has been how it's gone so far this season.
Yeah, I think before the Chelsea game, you think, oh, I'm not sure. Is it a good start? Could we have done better? But I think after you beat Chelsea away from home, you see the points accrued, you see the position in the table, you go, yeah, okay, now it's a good start. Now you can say that we've made a good start to the season. And you've also knocked off the list some very difficult away games when you look at Stamford Bridge, Anfield, St James's Park. You don't have to go there again. And you've managed to come away and say, yeah, do you know what? This number of games, we've got this number of points. Yeah, okay, that's a good start. So, yes, I think you can go into this Brighton game, you expect a better performance than the game in midweek. I think the players will be all switched on for this one. And I think there'll be a kind of reverting back to a more familiar starting lineup, certainly tactically, than we saw on Wednesday night. So this is a real opportunity. But you know, we've got a great record against Brighton, but Brighton will be well up for this, because this is a start of a huge month for Brighton. They have got some very difficult fixtures. I think they're playing Marseille in midweek, and then they've got some really difficult Premier League fixtures. Off the top of my head, I think it's Liverpool, Man City. I'm not sure in which order, but they've got some really tough games coming up. So they'll be targeting this game for a victory, particularly the way that we've turned them over. I think we did the double, didn't we, last season? Unai Emery matched and beat Roberto De Zerbi on 2 occasions, which not very many managers have managed to do. So I think they'll be coming in and really wanting to lay a marker against us this weekend.
Brighton they're slightly ahead of us in the league. I think they've won 5 from their first 6 and lost 1, so they're going well. You know, they're getting, like Villa, they're getting used to now having this heftier schedule, and they lost their first European game. They got knocked out the Carabao Cup as well. So, all the stuff we've just said about Villa, it's probably apparent at Brighton as well, but people all think that Brighton are absolutely flying, but they've actually only won one more game than Villa, haven't they? That's just one difference in the result. So I do think everything that we've spoken about, there is something in it, because we're seeing it with Brighton as well, and Villa and Brighton. I mean, Brighton have never been in Europe. Villa haven't been in Europe for an awful long time. De Zerbi's making a lot of changes to his side on a game-to-game basis as well. I mean, he's changing his goalkeeper an awful lot. Evan Ferguson's been ill quite a lot. He scored a hat-trick, and then I feel like he hasn't really played much since. They're making sweeping changes as well, and I would say, for as much as everyone raves about them, they've done a lot of similar things so far this season to Villa, haven't they?
Yeah, and they haven't had the kind of serious injuries that Villa have had, but they've had players missing. You mentioned Evan Ferguson there. Pascal Gross, who's been one of their ever-presents for seemingly years now. He's so important for them, and he plays a couple of different positions. He's been missing and will be missing for a while. And they have rotated. I think they've lost Milner as well, who started the season.
Dunk injured as well, have I imagined that? He's been injured.
Dunk was on the bench. He was on the bench against Stamford Bridge, so you would expect him to come back into the side. I think Webster's missed a few games. And then kind of Van Heck has been playing alongside Lewis Dunk. So, look, you're right. They've had to rotate. They've had to change. And also, let's not forget they've lost two massive players as well in Caicedo and McAllister in the summer. They're having to bed in new players. Adingra is someone who has played quite well over the last couple of games. He was on the bench, I think, against Chelsea. Will he come back in to their starting lineup? I think it'll be Dahu and Billy Gilmore central midfield for them as the two pivots. And how important was Caicedo and McAllister last season? But even then, Caicedo played some games at right back, as Pascal Gross did, and kind of inverted into central midfield. And Estupiñán can do the same from left back, inverting, or he can play high and wide. So they've got lots of flexibility. But I think it'll be Dahu and Billy Gilmore, and then Mitoma's just top class, isn't he? He came off the bench and scored within a few seconds against Bournemouth last week. And then it's whether it's Adingra kind of in that other wide position, or whether they go with another player out wide who can make those kind of out to in runs that they're kind of quite known for. Those balls over the top, we're going to have to be very, very wary of. Diagonals out wide, as we kind of end up repeating ourselves most weeks in terms of Villa's high line, which has been a net positive for us, but it has been caught out on a couple of occasions. And Mitoma is one of those players that you have to consider as being a real threat.
Could make a case, I'm not saying we will do this or that we should, but you could make a case for, I expect Mitoma to play because he's been benched a couple of times recently. They've been trying to keep him fresh, so I think he'll come and play against Villa, and he is electric, Mitoma, when he gets going. He's a sensational footballer. It's arguably a case for bringing Carlos back in at centre-back and playing Ezri Konsa at right-back, just because Konsa's one-on-one defending is so good. And I feel like that's the kind of defensive technique that Mitoma, he won't struggle because he's a very good player, but it'll give him a harder time, I would say, if we did that. That's my opinion. I don't know whether you agree with that.
100%. I do. I was thinking this yesterday, it might have been this morning, that Konsa is Villa's best 1v1 defender, and we're going to need someone who's fantastic at 1v1s when you're picking out Mitoma. And I think that the thought was triggered in my mind insofar as looking at the Villa team on Wednesday night. Why didn't Carlos play on Wednesday night and Pau Torres shift over to the left-hand side and play that kind of hybrid back three, back four, with Torres playing kind of the situational left back at times? That was confusing me slightly when McGinn was named in the side and ended up playing at left back. Why didn't Carlos play? Was that because Unai Emery has thought, well, Carlos can't play 2 games in a week, and I want to play him against Brighton at the weekend and shove, but move Konsa out into that right back position to try and handle Karim Mitoma? So that is definitely an option. And that was the only thing in my mind that triggered it, the fact that Carlos didn't play on Wednesday, and given his injury situation, is he able to play 2 games in a week? That would be the reason why maybe he would come in, Konsa would shift to right back, and Villa would kind of switch things up that way. Because for the life of me, I couldn't understand why McGinn was playing left back and Carlos didn't play.
Yeah, I'm not advocating Matty Cash to come out of the team, by the way, with that either, because I think Bailey's obviously picked up an injury at the week, and he may have played. Could play Cash on that right-hand side, especially against tough opposition. I think if you've got Cash and McGinn on the flanks against tough opposition who do try and create a lot of width, I feel that helps the fullbacks as well, having those two in front of them.
Yeah, and the Bailey injury might make his decision for him in that case, and you play Cash higher, and then you move Konza out wide. That could be the case. Brighton carry a big threat. We know that. So I think it would make sense. But then Konza's been playing so well Wednesday night aside. Konza's been playing so well. Do you risk disrupting him by moving his position? That's another thing to weigh up.
I did think at Chelsea there were signs that the Konsa Pau Torres partnership was starting to bear fruit a little bit. I felt like that was the best game as a pair. Konsa was excellent at Chelsea. He really, really was. Like, did everything well that you'd want a centre back to do. But I just think Matoma, if he plays, is their biggest threat, especially when you've got a Stupinian who doesn't really make, because he's a flying left back. You expect him to make overlapping runs, but actually he doesn't come in and invert like a stereotypical inverted fullback. He actually is on his bike, but underlapping, because Matoma pulls so wide. That's a dangerous combination with those two, but it doesn't work the way that you would expect it to work with a left-footed left back and a right-footed left winger. He's a Stupinian who underlaps, and Matoma who is really dangerous out wide and stays wide and backs himself one-on-one against the fullback.
Yeah, and then the other rotation that they like to do is the striker or the kind of two strikers sometimes that they play will drop deep. So it's a case of who picks up them. If it's a centre back, if it's Diego Carlos, does he go with Evan Ferguson and drop deep with him and push man to man on him? Then you've got to watch for Matoma in behind. Then you've got to watch for Estupinian being a part of the build up in that underlapping role. There's lots of things to consider when it comes to Brighton. You're not quite sure how they're going to play, who's going to play.
Yeah, it's hard to prepare
and what they're going to do.
It's really hard to prepare for Brighton because they do make wholesale changes, and De Zerbi's basically been saying, "Well, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep making those changes." It does make them a difficult side to set up against. I would say. You think Villa might be able to get some joy offensively on that side of the pitch with Diaby pulling wide if those two were to get caught high up the pitch? I wouldn't say their centre backs are the most mobile centre backs I've ever seen in my life, and Villa had some joy against Brighton on a couple of occasions last season. Diaby kind of pulling wide feels like it might be a good avenue for Villa.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I mean, it feels like Diaby has played so well. He's almost nailed down that shadow striker position. It almost feels difficult to move him out of that position. I'm not saying that he's not gonna start out wide, because I can't see that at all. But whether he decides, Emery, that maybe he's going to start in that off the striker position and then pull wide, which we've seen Leon Bailey do on a few occasions as well last season. I remember the game against Leeds, which he did it to great effect at home. Leon Bailey. So I mean, I can see Diaby pulling out wide, definitely. And it's a case of, if he does that, then McGinn will have to move into the number 10 position. Maybe Zaniolo does the same, and then those two become the two kind of tens in that situation, and Digne is the flying winger on the other side. So it depends where he wants Diaby to do his most damage, because he's played so well in that off the striker position, playing in that number 10 role. That do you want to give him a different job to do and kind of play out wide and play in behind Estupinian? Villa have got to get used to playing without the ball. Brighton are going to dominate, or going to try at least to dominate the football. And I remember I spoke to Emery at the end of last season. I think it was his last press conference of the season, and he was asked a question around what he wants to do in the summer and what he wants to see from his team. And what he said was that he wants to see more, I think he called it aggressivity off the ball. I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but aggressiveness off the ball. And Villa are going to have to show that. I'm not sure they've particularly showed it on Wednesday night, because they were all off it. I think the pressing is something that, Newcastle at home last season is the one that sticks in the mind. Can we get that sort of off the ball performance against Brighton this weekend to really get the crowd on side? So I think that is one thing that we're going to have to look at, and we're going to have to get used to not seeing the ball at the weekend.
I just think back to those, that end of last season. And I still think like some of the players that were a big part of that aren't on the pitch at the moment. Mings, Moreno was huge. Jacob Ramsey was huge at that point as well. Those players aren't there at the moment. They're big parts of the side, and big part of Villa being able to press and being able to be fluid and carrying more threat going forwards as well. So I just think they're huge misses. More good news for Villa, I guess, is that Ollie Watkins broke his Premier League duck last week against Chelsea, and we've seen in the past with Ollie. This will now, you think, if you look at Villa's fixtures as well, this is probably the toughest game Villa have actually got in the next 5. But you look at the next 5 games and think that there's some winnable games in there. And Ollie Watkins, it was a good time for him to score against Chelsea because he can be a little bit streaky.
I think he's got a great record as well against Brighton. I think he scored quite a few goals against them. So
I think
he needed the goal. There was no doubt about it. He needed the goal. I think you could tell his confidence lifted as soon as he scored that goal against Chelsea. And it feels like, hopefully this is his time now to go on a little bit of a run, because it has worked out that way for him in the past, where he's hasn't scored for a while, then scored, then gone on a little run, and it's coincided with Villa's good form as well. But we have to consider, and I know, again, it feels like we're talking about the same thing, but Ollie Watkins offers you so much in terms of even when he's not scoring, and that is off the ball stuff, and that is also when Villa have the ball as well. He's going to be the one that is making the runs across the front post or making the runs across a goalkeeper when Villa are working the ball into wide areas and looking for a cut back to a midfielder like McGinn or any of the midfield. Diaby running onto the ball. He's the one that is pinning defenders and pushing them towards their own goal, enabling the space for the likes of McGinn and Diaby to have that space in order to score goals. So you have to remember, even if he's not scoring, the amount of stuff that he is able to do for Villa with the ball, without the ball, it's absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. You just hope now that this is him now going on a bit of a run.
Yeah, Brighton don't keep too many clean sheets, so you think Villa are usually, especially at home. Villa are 10 in a row at home as well. Let's not forget. I'd back us to score in this game, so much will depend, obviously, on how we do the other way against Brighton. If we can keep it down to 1 or 0 going into our net, I'd back us to take something from the game, because I always think I was fancy us to score at home. In fact, I don't even think there's been a game where we haven't scored at home in the Premier League under Unai Emery. So it's an interesting game as well. It's on TV. Villa v Brighton, 2 teams that have become very popular in the last 12 months because of the way they finished last season. 2 teams that I think other sets of fans have an interest in, kind of like what both teams are doing and respect what both teams are doing. So it'd be a good game, be an interesting game. We're not going to do score predictions, so we didn't do it last week against Chelsea and we won 1-0, so we're knocking that on the head for now. No more score predictions from us for the foreseeable. But yeah, thanks ever so much for watching. Thanks to Dave for joining me. Let us know in the comments if you agree with what we've discussed in this show, and give the video a like and subscribe to the channel with your post notification on, please. I'm gonna set a high bar of 300 likes on this video. If we can, let's try and hit 300. I don't know, is that high? I'm not sure. Thousands of people watch it, so 300 likes actually should be reasonable. But yeah, if you give the video a like, let's try and hit 300 likes on this video. We'll be doing a post-match show at some point. It won't be on Saturday, I don't think, but we'll look at doing that on Sunday. Then, of course, the 1874 podcast even with Golfing Global Greg Evans will be next week as well, so watch out for that. Keep your eye on our socials and we'll keep you updated with what we do. Enjoy if you're watching on the TV wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you at Villa Park for those that are going to Villa Park, and as always, up the Villa.